Welcome to the Exploring Neurodiversity podcast for adults who support neurodivergent children. Whether you're an allied health professional, medical professional, education professional, or a parent of a neurodivergent child, you are welcome here. This podcast is recorded on the Aboriginal lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal people. I acknowledge the traditional owners, elders past and present, and I extend my acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and First Nations people listening in. I'm Adina from Play, Learn, Chat. I'm an autistic ADHDer, speech therapist, professional educator, speaker, and I also support neurodivergent business owners in my other business, Neurodivergent Business Coaching and Consulting. I'm obsessed with creating a world where neurodivergent people are understood, embraced, supported, and celebrated. A world where we neurodivergent people can understand ourselves and thrive in a life aligned with our individual strengths, wants, and needs. On the Exploring Neurodiversity podcast, you'll get my perspectives and conversations with my neurodivergent friends, all about how adults can best support neurodivergent children in our lives. I bring a neurodiversity-affirming approach and indeed a human-affirming approach to the support that we all provide for neurodivergent kids in our lives. Let's dive in. This is a crossover podcast episode. I'm sharing it both on my Exploring Neurodiversity podcast and also on my private podcast, Evolve Your Affirming Practice, which is for speech therapists who support autistic children. It just so happens that the topics I wanted to speak about this week were basically the same for both, so I thought it would make sense to share this with your ears. If you're a speech therapist, go to the link in the show notes and register for the Evolve Your Affirming Practice podcast training, which is free. If you're not a speech therapist, I hope that you'll stick around and listen to lots of episodes of the Exploring Neurodiversity podcast. Today, we're unpacking some of the nuances behind behavioural strategies when we're supporting autistic children. Now, I wanted to keep these episodes quite short, so there's only so much I can cover. There is much more that I teach in my Affirming Communication for Autistic Children course, which is for speech therapists. P.S. If you're listening when this comes out on the 13th of February, 2025, head to the link in the show notes immediately to check it out, because if you are on the waitlist, you're going to get a very fancy offer on the 14th of February, 2025. If you've missed that boat, no worries, go check it out. You can hop on the waitlist or you can register if it is open at the time. For anyone who supports autistic children, I do have another webinar. If the things I'm sharing with you today feel like just the tip of the iceberg and you want more information and more ideas, check out my webinar called Affirming Approach to Understanding and Supporting Behaviour. And you will get 10% off if you use the code POD10. I also have a free PDF handout for you linked in the show notes. And it's all about helping you clarify what are affirming approaches to supporting behaviour and what are not. So that is a free PDF handout and you're going to find the link in the show notes. Let's get on with today's episode. What I wanted to do was shed some light on some really practical things that might come up when you're interacting with an autistic child to help clarify what a neurodiversity affirming approach to supporting that behaviour might look like. Either changing that behaviour or not changing that behaviour. Let's just get clear, where do behavioural approaches typically show up in the kind of therapies, supports, teaching that we do with autistic children or any children that we're working with? Now, without judgment, these are just kind of a list of how behavioural approaches do show up in our work. In things like ABA therapy, applied behavioural analysis therapy, which, I did say no judgment, but I'm going to say that is broadly seen as harmful for autistic children most of the time. There's more nuance. Positive behaviour support, token reward systems, hand-over-hand guidance, sticker charts, planned ignoring or extinction, now and next boards where now you do the boring thing and next you do the fun thing, specific therapies like principles of motor learning, articulation, fluency therapy. Some of these approaches are very strongly behavioural. Now that you're noticing where behavioural approaches show up in your work, let's get clear on a few of the big ideas that underpin what affirming approaches to behaviour might look like. One of the core principles is that all communication is valid. This is a key principle to neurodiversity affirming approaches. We don't see speech, mouth words, as better than other forms of communication. Yes, more people in the world understand it. And yes, it can be more easily accessible for some people to use mouth words. But for a particular child in a particular moment, if speech is not easily usable for them, it's not their best method of communication, it is completely non-affirming to push for speech over other forms of communication. It's our job as a communication partner to autistic children to be supporting them in their communication in whatever way suits them best in that moment. Your role as a speech therapist is to support their communication. So there's many other ways that you'll be modeling, encouraging, guiding, and giving opportunities for them to use clear communication. And again, doesn't have to be speech or mouth words, but communication that will be understood more easily so that they can move through the world and be better understood by more people. That is really, really important. But speech is not the only way. It's not the only goal, and it's not the best goal. And if you're stuck thinking that it is, you have so much work to do. And I genuinely hope that you'll keep learning, listening, and join me in the Affirming Communication for Autistic Children course. A second core principle around affirming approaches to behaviour is seeking to find the deep reason behind a behaviour rather than treating behaviours based on the immediate triggers before them. It's way too simplistic and misses so much deep, important context if all we're looking at is what happened just before that behaviour. You need to go much deeper to understand all the things that have been building up for that child, all their fluctuations in capacity, all the different demands that have been placed on them, all the things that have been shifting and changing, all the uncertainty, all the sensory challenges, all the weird social interactions that have gone on for them over the past day, week, month, year. All of these things can contribute to what we might see as challenging behaviour. It's a really important reframe to help us understand that behaviours don't just come from nowhere. It's not a child being naughty. I absolutely hate that word, and I just think it's invalid. Behaviours that we might deem challenging are happening for almost always many reasons that are combining together, making it hard for a child to do what we would deem appropriate behaviour. There's days and days of training we could go through here, but I'm going to just leave that idea there. Another really big key idea that we need to keep in mind is that neurodiversity-affirming approaches prioritize connection, understanding, relationship over compliance and suppressing a child's true self. And so we have to talk about the nuance. Are all behavioural approaches bad? Are all behavioural approaches not neurodiversity affirming? No, absolutely not. Life is complicated, humans are complicated, and the philosophical ideas behind how we go about supporting and teaching autistic children, it's complicated. And that's why we're here, and I'm so glad you're here. One of the biggest filters you can run through in your mind when you're wondering, is it okay for me to try and change that behaviour or stop that behaviour, is why does that behaviour change need to happen? Is it in the best interests of the child if that behaviour change happens? Is it truly in their best interests? Or is it in the interest of other people around them where the child changing their behaviour to fit what the other people want will actually be harmful for the child? It might leave them dysregulated, feeling unheard, unsupported. It might lead them to mask all the time, thinking they can't show their true self because they've been told that's not acceptable. So it's really important to be thinking about situations where it's appropriate to work on shifting a child's behaviour and to set boundaries where a particular behaviour is not okay. Situations where there's a safety concern for the child themselves or for others, putting them at risk, putting other people at risk of harm, property damage, supporting safety and well-being. These are non-negotiables. That includes things like self-care skills, but they're kind of negotiable in a way. Find out what is hard for that child. If a child always is screaming and running off when you try to brush their teeth or when their parents try to brush their teeth, rather than forcing them to comply, maybe there are other ways to get that non-negotiable goal of oral hygiene done. The end goal can feel non-negotiable, but how you get there could be very negotiable. All of these supportive approaches come when you understand deeply what is hard for the child. Sometimes it's appropriate to use behavioural strategies and change a child's behaviour if it reduces their risk of harm from external factors. And this is especially important for people of colour, and it can be life-saving to teach, for example, a Black autistic child to stim more subtly in certain situations, because for them, if they're stimming in a way that might be natural to them out in the world, due to massive racism and prejudice, they might be perceived as dangerous or harmful to others. And that has led to injury. It has led to death before, and it is absolutely horrific, appalling. I'd love to wave a wand and change the world, but it's slow going. We have to acknowledge that personal safety is really important here. So that's a little express train ride through some of the big ideas underpinning what behavioural approaches are aligned with neurodiversity affirming practice, and where you might kind of say, yep, we're going to change behaviour in this way, that's appropriate, that's for a really good reason, and where we might say, actually, no, I, the adult, part of their environment, I'm the one that needs to change. So how does it look in practice? Like in our therapy sessions or when we're supporting children directly? I'm going to run through some goals, strategies, and situations that can come up in our speech therapy sessions that involve behaviour change or potentially behavioural approaches, and some of the considerations that you need to keep in mind when you decide whether to keep doing that approach or maybe how to shift it. Let's take a goal like encouraging an autistic child to give us eye contact. It's a traditional goal that I hope people are starting to leave behind and not do anymore, because it can be really distressing, distracting, difficult, meaningless, painful for an autistic child to give eye contact. Eye contact is not a necessary part of communication. I have so many more resources where I share a lot more deeply about this topic. And I'll link in the show notes to my survey where I have lots of responses from autistic people who've shared their experiences of eye contact. So this is one case where I would suggest prompting a child to change their behaviour or rewarding a child to change their behaviour so that they're looking at you in your eyes while you're communicating with each other is in almost all cases something you can leave behind. It's not in the child's best interests. It doesn't meet one of those key non-negotiable factors that can sometimes make us decide to, in fact, do that behaviour change. Another goal or part of a child's presentation that we may prompt or praise, whether it's conscious or unconscious on our part, is trying to get a child to sit still or have quiet hands, especially asking them to sit at a table and do tabletop work, if for that child in that moment it doesn't fit what they need from a sensory or attention perspective. Stimming is a natural part of self-regulation and expression. It can be regulating, it can be helpful, it can even be joyful. Praising or encouraging a child to, stop tapping their feet or to sit still or whatever that stim is that you're trying to get them to reduce, that can lead to masking, suppressing that stim can be really, really harmful for the child. It can be dysregulating. It can be distracting. They can have all their focus and attention on trying to have quiet hands or quiet feet and trying to control their body in that way that feels so unnatural for them that they then miss all of the connection, the learning, the interaction that you're supposedly having as your actual goal. Many children and many autistic children do not need to be still to learn. They do not need to be looking to learn. And oftentimes having movement, having some other activity, sitting or lying in a comfortable way for that child, not at a table, that can be the most facilitative context for them to learn, connect, and progress in other ways. When it comes to certain strategies that we might embed within our sessions, they may not be our main goals, but they often form some of the ways that we traditionally have been taught to and run our speech therapy sessions. Many of these approaches are behavioural approaches, and I want you to understand these nuances. That's the whole point of this episode. So we don't have to throw them all out the window. Each child, each moment, each session is an opportunity to think critically about the goals you're teaching and the way that you're teaching them. A very standard practice is using token reward systems. I don't want to say that they're always wrong, always bad, always harmful, but you need to think about them very carefully. Why you're using them, how you set them up, and the child's response. Ideally, whatever we do with children in our speech therapy sessions is something that is intrinsically motivating to the child, something that they genuinely enjoy doing and participating in. Sometimes there are good reasons to work on hard things. We'll call them hard things. And they may align with what a child really wants for themselves or a non-negotiable safety goal, for example. Let's say you're working with an autistic child who uses mouth words. They can speak and a lot of people understand them and they want to be able to pronounce their own name better. And one of the sounds in their name is one of their tricky sounds. The child has talked about wanting to say their name clearer. It's really hard for them. The goal is there for a good reason. It's within reach, but it's still boring to do the work to get there. If the child likes and responds well to token reward system, they like stickers, they like the structure, they like to see how many are left. And it's a fun gamified approach to making something kind of boring be a little bit more enjoyable. Absolutely, still totally fine to use a token reward system. If the token reward system is rewarding something that causes the child to hide their true self, mask their body and mind's real needs, then the token reward system may indeed motivate the child to do what you're asking of them, but there's much deeper consequences. This can teach a child that what they think their body is telling them is not true because the trusted adults around them told them not to believe it. The child can get more and more disconnected from their own deep beliefs true tendencies and needs. And that can lead to a lifetime of challenges, of disconnect from their emotions, from their preferences, and can be a significant contributor to complex PTSD. Let's talk about the humble now and next board. This again is a nuanced thing, whether it's an affirming approach to supporting children or it's not an affirming approach to supporting children. It's not a black and white thing. You need to use your judgment. So a typical now and next board might have 2 steps. Step 1, step 2, now and next. Similar to the token reward system, it can be a way to get kids to do something that they have to do, that they don't really want to do, so that they're then rewarded with something that they want, or in many cases, something that they actually need to feel regulated. When a now and next board is used as a tool to help a child understand what's happening, they have a sense of predictability. It's used more descriptively to explain what's coming up next, and even used in a way that is collaborative, where the child can help you create the plan. That can be really, really affirming, and especially for autistic children who often need a clear understanding of what's happening, what to expect, to feel okay and secure. However, where now and next boards can be harmful is where the next thing, the reward being withheld, is something that the child really needs to either feel regulated, to feel connected, to feel engaged. When it comes to sensory supports, it might look like telling the child they have to sit and do the worksheet and then they can go on the swing, where actually if they go on the swing, it will help them feel more regulated and then they'll have more capacity to do the worksheet. Or in fact, why not bring the worksheet onto the swing, or maybe don't even do the worksheet at all. If you're using a child's interest as the reinforcer, let's take Star Wars as the interest, and you're withholding their deep interest in Star Wars. All they wanted to do was talk about Star Wars today, and you put that at the end of the board, ensuring that they do your spelling worksheet first and then they can talk to you about Star Wars. That is coercive. That is compliance-based therapy. And you don't need that as a tool most of the time. You are a creative human with the ability to connect the dots between a therapeutic goal that you may be supporting the child with, something that's very well thought out, of course, and connect that with something that they're really interested with, not to force them to do the boring thing within the context of Star Wars, but to give them the opportunity to have their needs met, their deep burning desire to talk to you about Star Wars, while also practicing real world skills like writing out the character names in Star Wars as they go and practicing literacy in that mode. I have a whole section in my Affirming Communication for Autistic Children course where I give lots more examples and guide you through this process of matching a goal with an interest. Again, not in a coercive way to manipulate the child, but in a genuine, holistic, functional, relationship-based way where the child's intrinsic motivation will be the main thing helping them participate in that with you. So that's a really fast pit stop tour on some really important ideas. You can see how it's definitely not black and white. There's so much nuance when it comes to thinking about how we use behavioural strategies with children, and especially with autistic children. But keep coming back to that bigger, zoomed out question: what is in the true best interests of the child? And be ready to challenge assumptions. Be ready for you to be the one doing the changing. Be ready to support the teachers, the parents, the other people around the child to change expectations of what we're looking for and focus on the true heart of connection, communication, and relationship building. The idea underpinning all of this neurodiversity affirming approaches is simply to see the child as a whole, interesting, valid human and respect them for that and connect with them. And when you do that, you're going to find that reward charts, behavior charts, punishing behaviors, all of that is no longer needed. Your job is to keep that child feeling as regulated as possible, as connected as possible, as understood and supported as possible. And with that groundwork, you're going to find a lot of progress happens in communication, in connections, in learning, in participation, but it has to start from a space of deep respect and connectedness. Speech therapists, go and check out my Affirming Communication for Autistic Children course right now. And for anyone, speech therapist or not, if you are somebody who works as a professional with autistic children, check out my Affirming Approach to Understanding and Supporting Behavior webinar. Speechies, if you are not yet signed up for my Evolve Your Affirming Practice podcast, the 3rd episode is going even deeper into a particular corner of this behavioral question, thinking about where high trail speech or articulation therapy fits within the neurodiversity-affirming practice picture. The link is in the show notes. It is a completely free training, again in podcast mode, so you can keep listening as you go for a walk, look at some trees, do some learning, go for a drive, whatever you need to do while you're learning with me. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll catch you soon. Thank you so much for sharing this space and time with me. Thank you for being open to learning and unlearning and to listening to the perspectives and experiences of neurodivergent folks. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with a friend, share a screenshot on Instagram, pop a 5-star rating and a review in your favourite app, and join me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm at play.learn.chat. Have a spectacular day.